More than 20,000 people were screaming Elvis Presley's name. The orchestra was ready. The stage lights burned white against the darkness of the enormous arena. Musicians waited for their cue. Women near the front were already crying. Thousands of hands stretched toward the stage as Elvis stood beneath the lights in his brilliant white jumpsuit, microphone resting in one hand. The first notes of the next song were seconds away. Then Elvis saw something. Not in the center of the arena. Not among the screaming fans, waving photographs and signs. Near the front, slightly beyond the brightest spotlight, there was a small figure almost hidden behind the people standing around him. Elvis narrowed his eyes. And suddenly, he lowered the microphone. The conductor waited. The band looked toward him. Elvis raised one hand. Stop! The music never began. At first, the crowd screamed even louder. They thought Elvis was teasing them, building suspense. But Elvis wasn't smiling. He wasn't even looking at most of them. His eyes were locked on a young boy sitting in a wheelchair. The child wore a pale hospital gown beneath his jacket. A thin oxygen tube rested beneath his nose. His face looked exhausted. But his eyes were alive. They were fixed on Elvis with the kind of concentration that made the rest of the arena seem invisible. Beside him stood his mother. She was crying. Elvis slowly walked toward the edge of the stage. The screaming began to fade. He pointed toward the boy. "What's your name, son?" The child tried answering. His voice disappeared beneath the crowd. Elvis immediately turned toward 20,000 people. He raised one finger. "Hold on." Something extraordinary happened. The arena obeyed. Thousands of voices slowly disappeared. Elvis crouched at the edge of the stage. "Tell me again." The boy swallowed. "Danny." Elvis smiled. "Danny." He pointed toward him. "You come all the way here to see me." Danny nodded. Then his mother leaned toward a security guard. She whispered something. The guard's expression changed. He looked at Danny, then at Elvis. The guard climbed toward the stage and quietly spoke into Elvis's ear. The smile disappeared from Elvis's face. Danny had been receiving treatment for months. His condition had worsened. Doctors hadn't even been certain he was strong enough to attend the concert. But Danny had begged his mother. Because there was one thing he desperately wanted. He wanted to see Elvis Presley perform once. Elvis looked back at him. Suddenly, the screaming crowd didn't seem important. The enormous stage didn't seem important. The lights didn't seem important. There was only a little boy in a wheelchair who had fought through exhaustion just to reach this room. Then Danny reached into his lap. He held a small envelope. "For you." Elvis stepped down from the stage. Security immediately moved toward him. Elvis waved them back. 20,000 people watched as the most famous man in the building walked away from the spotlight and knelt beside one child. Danny handed him the envelope. Inside was a drawing. Two uneven stick figures stood beneath an enormous stage light. One was Elvis. The other was Danny. Above them, written in a child's shaky handwriting, "Me and Elvis singing together." Elvis stared at it. His jaw tightened. His eyes became wet. Danny suddenly looked worried. "Do you like it?" Elvis looked at him. His voice softened. "I love it." Danny smiled. Then he asked, "Mr. Elvis, can I sing with you?" Danny's mother covered her mouth. Security looked toward the stage manager. The musicians exchanged glances. This wasn't planned. There were 20,000 paying spectators waiting for a concert. Every song had a place. Every lighting cue had been rehearsed. Every minute mattered. But Elvis never looked toward his manager. He stood, turned toward the stage, and said, "Bring me another microphone." The arena exploded. Elvis immediately raised his hand. "Not for me." He pointed toward Danny. "For him." And before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? Write your city or country in the comments. If you believe moments of kindness can matter more than fame itself, like this video, comment below, share it with an Elvis fan, and subscribe. Because what Elvis was about to do for Danny would turn an ordinary concert into a night thousands of people would never forget. A second microphone arrived. Everyone assumed Elvis would return to the stage. He didn't. Instead, Elvis sat beside Danny's wheelchair. At audience level, away from the center spotlight, the orchestra began softly. Danny gripped the microphone with both hands. Elvis nodded. "Whenever you're ready." Danny began singing. His voice trembled. He missed a word, then another. His breathing became uneven. But Elvis never corrected him. Whenever Danny struggled, Elvis quietly filled the empty space. Whenever Danny found enough strength to continue, Elvis lowered his own voice. For perhaps the first time that evening, Elvis wasn't trying to command 20,000 people. He was trying to disappear. Because the song didn't belong to Elvis anymore. It belonged to Danny. Then halfway through, Danny stopped. His chest rose quickly. He couldn't catch his breath. His mother rushed forward. Elvis immediately raised his hand toward the orchestra. "Stop." The music died. Danny looked humiliated. His eyes filled. Elvis took his hand. "Take your time, son." Danny shook his head. "I'm sorry." Elvis frowned. "For what?" Danny stared at the microphone. His voice was barely audible. "I ruined your song." Elvis froze. 20,000 people waited. Elvis slowly brought his microphone toward his mouth. "Danny." The boy looked up. "You didn't ruin my song." Elvis squeezed his hand, then said the words that sent a wave of emotion through the entire arena. "You just gave it a reason to be sung." Danny began crying. His mother turned away. Across the arena, strangers wiped their faces. But Danny wasn't finished. He looked toward the enormous crowd, then whispered, "Are people mad?" Elvis frowned. "Mad about what?" "Because you stopped." Elvis slowly looked around the arena. 20,000 people. 20,000 tickets. 20,000 expectations. Then he looked back at Danny. "If anybody's mad because I stopped a concert for you." Elvis paused. "Then they came here for the wrong reason." The arena erupted. People stood. But something had changed. They weren't screaming Elvis's name. They were applauding Danny. The boy stared around him. For months, his world had been hospitals, machines, doctors, needles, white walls, fear. Now thousands of strangers were standing because of him. Elvis leaned closer. "Listen to that." Danny smiled through his tears. "They're clapping for you." Danny shook his head. "No." Elvis looked confused. Danny squeezed his hand. They're clapping because you're nice. Elvis stopped moving. That simple sentence reached somewhere applause never had. His head lowered. A tear rolled down his cheek. Then Danny said something else. There are kids at my hospital who wanted to come too. Elvis looked up. But they couldn't. Elvis's expression changed. How many? Danny shrugged. A lot. For several seconds, Elvis said nothing. Then he slowly stood. He turned toward his manager, and the softness disappeared from his voice. Find out which hospital. The manager nodded. Danny's mother stared at Elvis. But Elvis wasn't finished. He looked back at Danny, then said, Tomorrow morning, I want somebody there. His mother whispered, For what? Elvis looked at the sick child beside him, and his answer revealed that stopping the concert was only the beginning. For whatever those children need. Danny's mother stared at Elvis. For several seconds, she seemed unable to understand what he had just said. For whatever those children need. The manager looked at Elvis. You mean tonight? Elvis shook his head. Tomorrow morning. Danny's mother stepped forward. Mr. Presley, you don't have to. Elvis raised one hand gently. I know. That answer silenced her. He wasn't doing it because someone had asked. He wasn't doing it because cameras were watching. He wasn't even doing it because Danny knew who he was. Elvis looked toward the boy. Danny says there are children over there who wanted to be here. Danny nodded. But they couldn't come. Another nod. Elvis glanced around the enormous arena. Thousands of people had traveled from across the region to see him. Some had waited months. Some had spent money they probably couldn't afford. But somewhere outside those walls were children who would have traded almost anything just to sit in this room for a few minutes. Elvis looked toward his manager again. Find out what the hospital needs. The manager nodded. Equipment. Whatever. Treatment assistance. Whatever they need. Elvis's voice became firmer. Don't make them beg for it. Danny's mother began crying again. Elvis crouched beside the boy. You okay? Danny nodded. Can we finish? Elvis smiled. You still want to? Danny tightened his grip around the microphone. Yes. Elvis looked toward the orchestra. The conductor understood. The musicians prepared. But before the music returned, Elvis leaned toward Danny. This time, don't worry about getting every word right. Danny looked embarrassed. I forgot some. So do I. Danny's eyes widened. You. Elvis grinned. Don't tell anybody. Danny laughed. And 20,000 people laughed with him. For the first time since Elvis noticed him, Danny didn't look frightened. He looked like a child at a concert. Not a patient. Not a diagnosis. Not somebody surrounded by adults worrying about how much strength he had left. Just Danny. Elvis raised his microphone. Ready. Danny nodded. The orchestra began again. Softly. Danny entered. His voice was still weak. Still imperfect. But now something had changed. He wasn't trying to sound like Elvis. He wasn't trying to impress the crowd. He simply sang. And when he forgot a line, Elvis filled it. When he remembered the next, Elvis pulled back. At one point, Danny looked toward him. Elvis wasn't even singing. He was smiling, letting Danny carry the song alone. The audience realized what was happening. Elvis Presley had spent years learning how to dominate a stage. Tonight, he was using that experience to do the opposite, to make himself smaller so a child could feel bigger. The final note arrived. Danny finished it. Silence. Then the arena exploded. Danny's eyes widened. He looked at Elvis. I did it. Elvis smiled. Yes, sir, you did. Danny laughed. His mother covered her face. Elvis stood. He could have returned immediately to the stage and continued the concert. Instead, he remained beside Danny for another moment. Then he took the child's drawing. He folded it carefully and placed it inside his jacket. Danny noticed. You're keeping it. Elvis looked almost offended. Of course I'm keeping it. Danny smiled. Elvis touched his shoulder. You made me look pretty good in that picture. Danny laughed again. Then Elvis climbed back onto the stage. The orchestra waited. The audience waited. But Elvis didn't call for the next song. He walked toward the center spotlight, looked across the arena, then slowly raised the microphone. We spent a lot of time chasing things. The room quieted. Records, money, success, being number one. Elvis glanced toward Danny. But sometimes, he paused. Somebody gets put right in front of you to remind you what being number one doesn't mean. Nobody moved. Elvis gestured toward the enormous arena. If all this can't help somebody when they need it. His voice became quieter. Then what good is it? The applause was enormous. But Elvis didn't bask in it. He looked toward the orchestra, then toward Danny. The boy was smiling. Only then did Elvis continue the concert. Something was different afterward. Every song seemed to carry another meaning. People still screamed. They still stood. They still reached toward Elvis. But many kept looking toward the wheelchair near the front. Danny was exhausted. His mother noticed. So did Elvis. Between songs, he checked on him. A nod, a glance, a small gesture asking, "You okay?" Danny always nodded. He refused to leave. He had fought too hard to reach this concert. He wanted every second. When Elvis finally reached the last song, he looked toward Danny one more time. The boy's eyes were heavy, but he was smiling. Elvis sang. Then the concert ended. 20,000 people rose. The lights shifted. Security prepared the exit routes. But before Elvis disappeared backstage, he walked toward Danny again. You made it. Danny smiled. All of it. Elvis crouched. That's more than some grown men can handle. Danny laughed weakly. His mother thanked Elvis again. He shook his head. Get him home safely. Then Elvis looked toward security. Make sure they don't have to fight through that crowd. Arrangements were made immediately. Danny and his mother would be escorted safely away from the arena. Danny reached for Elvis's hand. Mr. Elvis. Yes. Will I see you again? The question caught him. Elvis could have made a promise he couldn't control. Instead, he squeezed Danny's hand. I hope so. Danny nodded, then said, Don't lose my picture. Elvis touched his jacket. Right here. Danny smiled. And for that moment, it was enough. Backstage, the mood should have been celebratory. Another enormous crowd. Another successful concert. Another night of Elvis Presley proving why thousands were willing to fill an arena just to hear him sing. But Elvis wasn't talking about the show. He was talking about the hospital. What did you find out? His manager had already begun making calls. They had identified the treatment program connected to Danny's hospital. There were children facing long stays, families struggling with expenses, needs that existed whether Elvis Presley knew about them or not. Elvis listened, then asked, "What can we do?" His manager began explaining possibilities. Elvis interrupted. "No publicity." The man paused. "Elvis, no cameras. It could be good." Elvis turned. "For who?" The manager stopped. Elvis continued. "For the hospital." Silence. "For those children." No answer. "Or for me." The room became quiet. Someone suggested that public attention might encourage others to contribute. Elvis understood the argument, but he didn't want Danny turned into a photograph beside a giant check. He didn't want a sick child's night transformed into advertising. Finally, Elvis said simply, "This isn't about me." So the arrangements moved forward quietly. Assistance, support for the children's treatment program, help where it could actually matter. No stage, no announcement, no applause. And perhaps that was why it mattered more. Because generosity is easy to confuse with performance when everybody is watching. The harder question is what someone does after the audience goes home. Elvis had answered that question. But stories don't always remain private. Parents heard. Hospital workers talked. Musicians mentioned what had happened. People who had been inside the arena told friends about the boy Elvis had stopped the concert for. Reporters began asking questions. They wanted details. They wanted numbers. They wanted photographs. They wanted another Elvis Presley headline. But the people who had witnessed the moment understood something the headlines couldn't quite capture. They hadn't watched a superstar become larger. They had watched him step away from his own spotlight so someone else could stand inside it. Then several weeks later, another envelope arrived. Elvis noticed the hospital name immediately. He stopped what he was doing, opened it. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, crayon guitars, microphones, stages, children standing beside Elvis. Some drawings were funny, some barely recognizable. Elvis smiled as he moved through them. Then he reached one picture and stopped. He knew the handwriting before he even saw the name. "Danny." Elvis slowly lifted the drawing. It showed an enormous audience. A stage. Two figures standing together. Elvis and Danny. But beneath them, Danny had written something. Only 5 words. Elvis read them once. Then again. The smile disappeared from his face. His eyes filled. Because Danny hadn't written about meeting Elvis Presley. He hadn't written about singing before 20,000 people. He hadn't written about the applause. Instead, beneath the picture were the words. "The night I wasn't sick." Elvis sat completely still. And suddenly, he understood that what Danny remembered most about that concert wasn't Elvis at all. Elvis Presley read the 5 words again. "The night I wasn't sick." He had received thousands of letters, photographs, gifts, drawings. People wrote to tell him they loved him. People told him his music had changed their lives. Some begged for autographs. Others simply wanted him to know their names. But this was different. Danny hadn't drawn Elvis standing alone beneath a spotlight. He hadn't drawn himself watching from a wheelchair. He had drawn two figures together before an enormous audience. And underneath them, he had written the only thing that seemed to matter. The night I wasn't sick. Elvis lowered the drawing. For one night, Danny hadn't been a patient. He hadn't been a diagnosis. He hadn't been the boy adults whispered about when they thought he couldn't hear them. He hadn't been surrounded by machines, medicine, needles, doctors, and frightened faces. For one night, he had been a singer, a performer, a kid holding a microphone while thousands of people listened. And suddenly, Elvis understood why Danny's words hurt so much. He hadn't cured the boy. He hadn't erased his illness. He had done something much smaller. But perhaps for Danny, just as important. He had given him a few minutes in which the illness wasn't the biggest thing about him. Elvis leaned back. The room around him became quiet. Someone nearby asked, "You okay?" Elvis didn't answer immediately. He held up the drawing. "Look at this." The person read the sentence. No response came. What could anyone say? Elvis looked toward the dozens of other drawings from the hospital. Guitars, microphones, stages, children standing beside him. Some had never attended the concert. Some had only heard Danny describe it. Yet somehow that night had traveled beyond the arena. Elvis touched the edge of Danny's picture, then whispered. He remembered how it felt. Not how Elvis sounded. Not what Elvis wore. Not even what song they sang. How it felt. That distinction stayed with him. In the days that followed, Elvis kept Danny's drawing nearby. People continued talking about the concert. Reporters wanted the story. They wanted Elvis to explain why he stopped the show, why he left the stage, why he sat beside the wheelchair, why he arranged assistance afterward. The questions irritated him, because to Elvis, the answer seemed obvious. A child needed a moment. He had been in a position to give him one. What else was he supposed to do? Someone asked whether Elvis realized how powerful the publicity could become. Elvis's expression hardened. That's exactly what I don't want. But people love stories like this. Elvis looked at him. Danny isn't a story. The man stopped. Elvis continued. He's a boy. A pause. Don't forget that. It was the same reason Elvis had resisted turning the hospital assistants into a public spectacle. The support had been arranged quietly without a giant check or staged publicity moment. Because the easiest way to destroy an act of kindness was to make the giver more important than the person receiving it. And Elvis had already said what mattered. This isn't about me. Weeks passed. The concerts continued. New cities, new stages, new crowds. Every night, thousands screamed Elvis Presley's name. But sometimes, before walking beneath the lights, Elvis would remember Danny. He would remember the tiny microphone shaking in the boy's hands. The missed words. The difficulty breathing. The apology. I ruined your song. And Elvis's answer. You just gave it a reason to be sung. Those words had sounded spontaneous when he said them. Now Elvis began understanding them differently. A song wasn't only successful because people bought it. It wasn't valuable simply because it reached number one. Sometimes a song mattered because of where it arrived. A hospital room. A lonely house. A frightened child. a mother trying not to cry. Maybe music became most powerful when it stopped belonging entirely to the person performing it. Elvis thought about the enormous machinery surrounding his career. Managers, musicians, lighting, security, schedules, tickets, money. Every night required hundreds of moving pieces. But Danny hadn't cared about any of that. He had wanted one thing: to sing with Elvis. And when he finally got that chance, Elvis had discovered something unexpected. Danny didn't need the superstar. He needed the man sitting beside him. Back at the hospital, Danny's story had become legendary among the children. They asked him questions. What was Elvis like? Was he really that tall? Did you get scared? What did the crowd sound like? Danny answered everything. But his favorite part wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't when Elvis first noticed him. It wasn't when Elvis left the stage. It wasn't even the moment 20,000 people stood and applauded. Danny told them about the moment he couldn't breathe. When the orchestra stopped. When everything became silent. When he thought he had destroyed the song. And Elvis held his hand. "Take your time, son." That was the moment Danny remembered most clearly. Because everyone else in his life seemed to be racing against time. Doctors, appointments, treatments, schedules, adults constantly discussing what had to happen next. But Elvis Presley, with 20,000 people waiting for him, had told Danny there was no hurry. Take your time. For a sick child, those words meant something entirely different. One afternoon, Danny's mother sat beside his hospital bed. The concert drawing rested nearby. Danny looked tired. She adjusted his blanket. Then he asked, "Do you think Elvis kept the first picture?" His mother smiled. "I think he did." "How do you know?" "Because you saw him put it in his jacket." Danny thought about that. What about the new ones? The hospital sent it. But did he keep it? His mother took his hand. "I imagine he did." Danny looked toward the ceiling. Then smiled. "I hope so." "Why?" The boy's answer was simple. "So he remembers me when everybody's screaming." His mother turned away. Her eyes filled instantly. Danny didn't notice. He continued. "Because when everybody screams his name, maybe it's hard to remember one person." His mother looked back at him. "You think Elvis will forget you?" Danny shrugged. "He knows lots of people." She squeezed his hand. "Some people are harder to forget than others." Danny smiled, then closed his eyes. And before we continue, think about that question yourself. What would you remember most? The song, the applause, or the moment someone stopped everything just for you? If Danny's story means something to you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that kindness doesn't have to be enormous to become unforgettable. Backstage at another concert, Elvis stood seconds away from walking onto the stage. The roar outside was deafening. Thousands were chanting his name. A stagehand gave him the signal. Elvis reached into his jacket. He had carried something with him. Danny's drawing. He unfolded it. The huge audience. The two figures. And those 5 words. "The night I wasn't sick." Elvis stared at them. Outside, the crowd became louder. "Elvis, Elvis, Elvis." He folded the picture again. Then whispered, "Don't forget why you're out there." The stage manager looked toward him. "What?" Elvis shook his head. "Nothing." Then he walked toward the light. But that night, something had changed. He noticed people differently. Not as a crowd, as individuals. The woman crying in the first rows. The elderly man clapping quietly. The child sitting on his father's shoulders. The young soldier watching without moving. 20,000 people could become one giant noise if you let them. Danny had reminded Elvis that every voice belonged to a person. Every person had arrived carrying something nobody else could see. Fear, grief, hope, loneliness, a dream. And perhaps that was the real responsibility of standing beneath the brightest spotlight. Not to convince everyone that you were larger than life, but to remember that the people looking up at you had lives just as real as yours. Danny had taught Elvis that without even trying. Then, after another performance, Elvis received news from Danny's hospital. The message was brief. Danny's condition had worsened. Elvis stopped reading. His hand tightened around the paper. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Elvis asked, "Can he talk?" The answer came quietly. "Sometimes." Elvis looked toward Danny's drawing. He remembered the wheelchair, the oxygen tube, the trembling microphone, the boy asking whether the crowd was angry, the boy saying, "They're clapping because you're nice." Elvis stood. "What are you doing?" someone asked. He reached for his jacket. His answer came immediately. "I'm going to see Danny." "Elvis, you've got commitments tomorrow." Elvis stopped at the doorway. Slowly, he turned around. The room became silent, because everyone recognized the expression on his face. He wasn't asking permission. Then Elvis said the sentence that ended the argument. 20,000 people got me that night." He looked toward Danny's drawing. "Tomorrow can wait." A pause. "Tonight, Danny gets me." And this time, there would be no stage. No orchestra. No screaming fans. No brilliant white spotlight. Only Elvis Presley. A hospital room. And a little boy who had once dreamed of singing beside him. There were no screaming fans when Elvis Presley arrived. No orchestra. No spotlights. No photographers waiting behind velvet ropes. Only the quiet fluorescent lights of a hospital corridor and the distant sound of machines behind closed doors. Elvis walked faster than the people accompanying him. A nurse recognized him immediately. Her eyes widened. "Elvis Presley." Elvis raised one finger gently. "Please." She understood. No announcement. No excitement. Not here. Danny's room. The nurse's expression changed. She pointed toward the end of the corridor. Elvis started walking. Then she stopped him. "Mr. Presley." Elvis turned. "He's very weak tonight." The words struck him. Elvis nodded slowly. "Does he know I'm coming?" "No." "Good." He continued down the corridor. Every step felt heavier. This wasn't like approaching a stage. On stage, Elvis knew what to do. He knew where to stand, when to sing, how to smile, how to turn nervous energy into electricity. But there was no performance that could prepare a man for this. He stopped outside Danny's room. Through the small window in the door, he saw him. The boy who had once held a microphone before thousands of people now looked impossibly small beneath white hospital blankets. His mother sat beside him. Elvis lowered his head, then quietly knocked. Danny's mother looked toward the door. Her eyes widened. She stood immediately. Elvis entered. "Please," he whispered, "don't get up." She covered her mouth. "You came." Elvis looked toward the bed. "I said I hoped I'd see him again." Then Danny moved. Slowly, his eyes opened. He looked toward the doorway. For a second, there was no recognition. Then his eyes widened. "Elvis." Elvis smiled. "Hey, partner." Danny's face changed instantly. The hospital room disappeared from his expression. The exhaustion remained. The machines remained. But suddenly, behind all of it, there was the boy from the concert again. "You came." Elvis walked toward the bed. "Course I did." Danny looked toward his mother. "I told you he remembered me." She couldn't answer. Elvis pulled a chair beside the bed, then reached inside his jacket. "I brought something." Danny watched. Elvis unfolded a piece of paper. The drawing. The enormous audience. 2 stick figures. And beneath them, "The night I wasn't sick." Danny stared. "You kept it." Elvis looked offended. "What did you think I was going to do with it?" A weak laugh escaped Danny. Elvis smiled. "You told me not to lose your first picture." "I remember. So I figured I'd better be careful with this one too." Danny reached toward the drawing. Elvis placed it gently in his hands. For several seconds, the boy simply looked at it. Then he whispered, "That was the best night." Elvis swallowed. "Mine too." Danny looked up. "You've had lots of concerts." Elvis nodded. "Sure have." "Bigger ones?" "Yes." "More people?" "Yes." Danny frowned. "Then how could mine be the best?" Elvis leaned closer. "Because bigger doesn't always mean better." Danny stared at him. Elvis pointed toward the drawing. "Sometimes one person can give you something 20,000 people can't." Danny smiled. "What did I give you?" Elvis hesitated, then answered, "A reminder." "Of what?" Elvis looked toward the hospital window, then back at Danny. "Why the music matters." Danny became quiet. After a while, Danny asked, "Did you help the other kids?" Elvis smiled. "I had some people talk to the hospital." Danny's mother looked toward him. Elvis continued before she could thank him. "That's between us." Danny nodded seriously. "Secret." "Secret." The boy smiled, then looked toward the corner. A small guitar sat against the wall. Elvis noticed. "What's that?" Danny's mother wiped her eyes. "The nurses found it for him." Danny whispered, "I've been learning." Elvis raised his eyebrows. "You've been holding out on me." Danny smiled. "I know 3 chords." Elvis stood. "Well, that's practically dangerous." Danny laughed. Elvis picked up the guitar. It wasn't expensive. The finish was worn. 1 tuning peg resisted him. He adjusted it carefully, then sat beside Danny again. "What do you know?" Danny named a song. Elvis smiled. "Good choice." Danny's mother watched from the other side of the bed. Elvis began playing softly. No amplifier. No orchestra. Just an acoustic guitar in a hospital room. Danny joined him. His voice was barely above a whisper. Elvis deliberately sang even softer. Once again, he wasn't trying to overpower the boy. He was making room for him. Danny forgot a line. He looked embarrassed. Elvis continued playing. "Remember what I told you." Danny nodded. Take my time. Elvis smiled. Take your time. Danny breathed. Then continued. The song moved slowly, imperfectly, beautifully. A nurse stopped outside the door. Then another. Nobody entered. Nobody applauded. They simply listened. And when the song ended, Danny looked at Elvis with a tired smile. Better than last time. Elvis pretended to think. A little. Danny laughed. Only a little. Can't make your head too big. Danny's mother laughed through her tears. For a few precious minutes, the room didn't feel like a hospital room. It felt like music. Eventually, Danny became tired. His mother adjusted his pillow. Elvis prepared to leave. But Danny reached for his hand. Wait. Elvis sat again. What is it? Danny stared at him. When you're singing. Elvis waited. Do you ever get scared? The question surprised him. Sure. Danny looked unconvinced. You're Elvis. Elvis smiled. Apparently Elvis gets scared too. Of what? Elvis thought carefully. Disappointing people. Being alone. Losing people I care about. Danny listened. Then asked, even with everybody loving you? Elvis looked toward the doorway. A crowd can love you and still not know you. Danny considered that. Then smiled. I know you. Elvis looked back. You think so? Danny nodded. You stopped. Elvis didn't understand. Danny continued. At the concert. You could have kept singing. But you stopped. The words hit Elvis with unexpected force. Danny wasn't impressed by the records. The cars. The clothes. The money. The fame. His proof that he knew Elvis was simpler. You stopped. Elvis lowered his head. Then squeezed Danny's hand. Maybe you do know me. Danny smiled. Before leaving, Elvis stood in the doorway. Danny was struggling to keep his eyes open. Elvis. Yes, son. When everybody screams your name. Elvis remembered what Danny's mother had told him. The boy had worried Elvis might forget one person among thousands. Danny whispered, Remember me. Elvis touched the drawing inside his jacket. I will. Promise. Elvis nodded. Promise. Danny closed his eyes. Elvis stood there for several seconds, then quietly stepped into the hallway. Danny's mother followed. The moment the door closed, she began crying. Elvis looked down. Thank you, she whispered. You gave him something I couldn't. Elvis shook his head. No. She looked at him. You've been here every day. You've held his hand when nobody was watching. You brought him through things I couldn't imagine. Elvis glanced toward the room. I gave him a song. Then back at her. You gave him everything else. She covered her face. Elvis hugged her. No cameras captured it. No audience applauded. And that was exactly how Elvis wanted it. Later, standing outside the hospital, Elvis looked toward the night sky. Someone asked if he was ready to leave. He didn't answer immediately. His hand went inside his jacket. He touched Danny's drawing. The words were still there. The night I wasn't sick. Elvis finally understood something. People often believed kindness had to be enormous to matter. A huge donation. A dramatic gesture. A life-changing miracle. But Elvis couldn't give Danny the miracle everyone wanted. He couldn't promise tomorrow. He couldn't erase the hospital. He couldn't defeat the illness with fame. What he could give him was time. A stopped concert. A microphone. A chair beside a wheelchair. A quiet song in a hospital room. And perhaps most importantly, the feeling that for a little while, Danny was more than what was happening to him. At concerts afterward, Elvis would sometimes look across the audience differently. Thousands of faces disappeared into darkness beyond the lights. But he remembered what Danny had taught him. A crowd wasn't really a crowd. It was thousands of individual lives sitting beside one another. Every person had something they were carrying, something invisible, and every once in a while, being a performer meant noticing one of them. That was why the most important moment of that extraordinary concert wasn't a perfect note. It wasn't the applause. It wasn't even Elvis leaving the stage. It was the moment a frightened boy apologized. "I ruined your song." And Elvis answered, "You just gave it a reason to be sung." Because Danny had. For one unforgettable night, more than 20,000 people entered an arena expecting to watch Elvis Presley perform. Instead, they watched him stop. They watched a superstar surrender his spotlight to a child. They watched Danny struggle for breath, recover, and finish his song. And somewhere between the first trembling note and the final applause, Danny stopped being the sick boy in the wheelchair. He became the person everyone had come to hear. Years could pass. Stages could disappear. Records could fade. Crowds could go home. But one little drawing would preserve what truly mattered. Two figures, one stage, one enormous audience, and 5 words written by a child who understood the night better than anyone. The night I wasn't sick. Because sometimes the greatest thing a legend can do isn't make the whole world look at him. Sometimes it's noticing the one person everyone else almost missed.